You know what today is, Mr. Miller?
Thursday.
It's the first day of the rest of our lives. No, but you know what? I was actually just thinking about this probably about a half an hour ago before we started talking. You know what I crave more than anything else?
What's that?
Is the ability to be authentic. Just be authentic and not have to worry about unnecessary negative consequences. For example, like there's a couple of things that come to mind. Like on the job, for example. Self-censorship has just become such an impediment. I think
It's pervasive.
it is pervasive with cancel culture and everything else, but I actually think it's also partially a product of fiat currency. So everybody is so reliant on their job that they're afraid to say the wrong thing. And if you say the wrong thing, even if you're right, or you call somebody out for certain behavior, if it's not done in a politically correct fashion, then you risk losing your job, or you are made out to be the bad guy. And I don't like it. I mean, I saw it a lot during COVID.
Yeah, that's the big example is COVID. It's I'm not gonna. You can't say you're not gonna take the vaccine, or you're ostracized and your family shuns you and all this crazy stuff. And then you get the threat of losing your job there too. So
I think one of the main cures to the problem is having liquid, uncensorable money. I think that's got a lot to do with it.
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. When people realize, so I mean, if you think about it, everybody's wealth is tied up in some sort of third party.
Yeah, they don't have self-custody of their own money.
Right, like
that's what Saylor says too. Is like a dangerous society or an armed society is a polite society. So the theory there, I guess he's talking about, is like when you have the ability to leave the country, then at any time with all your money intact, you have a threat against society. You can. And so the government becomes more compliant to your wishes and stuff like that.
You could leave the country. You could leave jobs. I've done that. Like, no, I mean, if I
vote
am in
with
disagreement,
your feet, vote with your wallet, vote with your money, vote
right.
with your time.
Instead of having your money tied up either in a fiat bank account and it's constantly getting debased, so you're constantly chasing that next dollar, or it's tied up in a 401k where if you have to liquidate it, you are penalized with taxes, etc. And most people don't even know what's in their 401k.
Yeah, investments that I've had in the past were managed by other people. That's what most people do. And if you look into what you may not agree with some of the things that the companies are doing that you're invested in, and also, it's not the choice that you're making. It's someone else's choice, and they made, like the people that I used were good over a long period during the 90s and 2000s,
Mm-hmm.
but then eventually fell off when new stuff came about, and have no idea about Bitcoin and would never invest in it.
The crazy thing is, all of this is a result of broken money. For example, I don't like it when certain people who are being disingenuous. Take Dave Ramsey, for example. I'm not picking on him because I don't like him. I'm just simply saying, like, there are things he's right about, things he's good at, and things he's wrong about. Well, I don't like it when people cherry pick for the sake of being disingenuous, but for the sake of being accurate, I'm going to pick the year 2000, and we'll take gold, the price of gold. Since the year 2000, gold has outperformed the S&P 500. So
The S&P 500 is basically losing money. Like, what is it? Comparative to inflation?
gold was the sound money. Gold was the soundest form of money that humans had prior to Bitcoin. So if we admit that gold is baseline, gold is basically net zero. So when you were investing money, let's say back in the 1920s, before that stock market crash, when you were investing money, you were investing with the expectation that you're going to get a real positive rate of return. So that would mean it would have to outpace real money, gold, because your currency theoretically was backed by gold.
Yeah.
So if the S&P 500 is losing value relative to gold, two things. One, it's almost as if economic activity is actually contracting. But two, if you liquidate your shares of, let's see, SPY or some S&P 500 derivative, you get to pay taxes on it. So you're paying taxes on the fact that you actually lost real value. And it's all just a side effect of broken money. So we have to diversify in order to protect ourselves from collapsing wages. We'll say collapsing wages. Because, and I'm not, I don't believe in the victim mentality where, you thrive and you survive as a man in society in spite of the challenges. There's a ridiculous amount of opportunity in the United States of America, but having to diversify in bonds and the S&P 500, it's 2025 right now.
This is why people outsource their investing to a professional,
right?
Quote unquote.
That's another good point. Not only are you losing value relative to gold, but you're also
giving up autonomy of your.
You're paying a management fee.
Right, that's true too.
You're paying a management fee.
Taxes, management fees, capital gains, blah blah blah.
And the Magnificent Seven. You're basically, if it wasn't for the 7 winners in the S&P 500, you have to pick over 400 losers just to pick the winners.
That's like the technology stocks, basically?
I believe like Nvidia's in there,
yeah.
Probably Apple, Microsoft.
Right.
I can't remember off the top of my head right now. But they're basically responsible for the growth that we've seen in the S&P 500 in recent years.
They prop up the rest of it, and they have an outsized sort of impact on the overall, what do you call it?
And bonds are a melting ice cube. So bonds are not a safe haven. All these companies who hold U.S. Treasuries are actually losing. They're actually losing in real terms. But if you're somebody who started your career in the year 2000 and just simply bought gold coins, which I don't recommend because of theft risk, natural disaster risk, etc. Not to mention counterfeit risk. But if you're somebody who did that, you outpaced the S&P 500.
That's crazy.
And most 401ks, I don't know, is it the 60-40 rule? So theoretically you have 40% of your portfolio in bonds. So you have to have 40% of your portfolio in bonds just to essentially cover your ass.
Yeah. In case of recession and stuff like that.
So if you're, and contrary to what the academics would say, there really is no accurate way to measure inflation. There's no, because all prices are always changing relative to something else. The best we've come up with until Bitcoin was gold. But you can't,
But Do you think Bitcoin solves the authenticity crisis? That was what you started with.
Yeah. Having the ability to store your wealth and have it be unconfiscatable, uncensorable, it gives you the freedom to travel, gives you the freedom to change jobs. You can store your economic energy, be yourself, and if people or society doesn't like it, tough shit, you move on.
It's like a value proposition based on your autonomy. It's like decentralizing finance, decentralizing wealth.
It's about personal sovereignty.
Right.
And
that's what gives you value, is your ability to walk away.
a wise man once said, if you're not able to walk away from the table, you're in no position to negotiate. Do you know who said that?
Trump.
Donald Trump, President Donald Trump. But he wrote that in his book, The Art of the Deal. But I've never forgotten that, and I agree 100%. If you're not able to walk away from the table, you're in no position to negotiate. And I think that's where a lot of people are. If you go back and look at what people were making under Ford, the car manufacturer, it was the equivalent of $225,000 approximately. That's 75 ounces of gold. So we're talking a plant job, an assembly line job, where they were making approximately $225,000 a year if you actually adjust it for the price of gold.
That's absolutely insane. I had no idea.
So people's wages are being suppressed, and it's not a good situation.
No.
It's not what made this country. There's always the ability to success, and now people are succeeding in spite of a debasing currency, in spite of inflation, in spite of, frankly, a deteriorating monetary system. It's almost as if we live in a bubble that can't pop. Meaning, anytime there's a downturn in people's assets, the Fed steps in and reinflates everything. But they can't artificially increase people's wages because the private sector is relying on that. So they can just revalue the price of debt, which gives advantages to banks who are issuing mortgages, gives advantages to companies who can refinance at virtually no cost, but who it hurts is the worker.
Right.
But I'm a big believer there's no greater feeling, vibration, sense of personal sovereignty than just the ability to be authentic and be yourself. And I think we're losing that. And it's a result of many things. A larger and larger government, and a currency that can be debased, no accountability. The House of Representatives, in the United States of America, the House of Representatives was supposed to, all bills for raising revenue, they were supposed to handle tax policy. And on the surface, it seems like they are, but in reality, they're not even addressing the most fundamental tax, which is basically a hidden tax on the value of assets, the
inflation, right?
Debt.
Yeah.
Debt. The value of debt is so manipulated. If you have, it's a quasi command economy, because the Federal Reserve basically controls and manipulates the price of debt, not the free market. The free market does not control the price of debt. College tuition is a perfect example of what happens, right? We want to be fair and equitable, but we want to give everybody a chance to go to college. Okay, well, if the government ensures that people who otherwise would not be able to afford going to college can go to college, and they ensure these student loan companies that they'll be repaid, and therefore there's artificially low interest rates to go to college, it gives universities the liberty to raise prices, and it causes the price of tuition to go up for everybody else. So now, because we don't want to allow the people who supposedly can't afford to go to college or whatever the case may be, now nobody can afford it. Or they can afford it artificially, and then they get out into the workforce and they realize,
what the fuck did I do?
and then on top of that, if you have student loans, now you're trying to buy a house, the deck is stacked against you. Not that you can't do it, but in a way it's a math game, it's a statistics game. You're going to have, you're squeezing the middle class. You're squeezing the middle class. The ability, the amount of jobs available, the amount of economic energy that's available to harness is just weighed down by all this debt in the system. And it keeps everybody essentially a slave. And then if you're lucky enough, if what you have is financed by debt, your natural tendency is going to be to self-censor. Your natural tendency. I'm just going to put up with nonsense at work because every job's going to be the same. It's not like you can go find another assembly line job, make $225,000. People love that's a bold claim that so many people just would not like. There's no way. I say at work, like I work in a plant, and there are things that we could do, things that we could adjust, and everybody in there, the humble little machine operators, could make $200,000 a year if it wasn't modeled in almost like a socialist fashion, even in the private sector. But nobody actually believes that. They think, oh, if you're paid based off of what you produce, that they'd actually be making less. But in reality, what we're all doing is we're encouraging each other to.
Yeah, well, there's no incentive. Everyone gets paid the same and doesn't get paid off of production. And where's the production coming from? It's just people going along to get along, to just have a job to make money to live, and then they're gonna self-censor if they have any kind of controversial views too. So.
And then you find out that doing more, you're not gonna be compensated adequately.
Except with more work.
yeah, you're not gonna get compensated adequately. Maybe you could make a little bit more, but you're not gonna get compensated adequately. Everything's gonna fall on your shoulders, and then you simply find most places, it seems like, in America, that are actually producing things of real economic value, they're just looking for bodies. They're not looking for problem solvers necessarily. They're not looking for hard workers. They'd love to have them, but at the end of the day, they're looking for a certain number of bodies.
Yeah.
And what you find as a worker is that you're better off. You can't get fired if you do just baseline. And so that's what you do, because there's no incentive. I mean, yes, you could climb the corporate ladder, but that's another thing that
to do that, you have to kind of be inauthentic to begin with. You have to, the skill that you learned, you are not doing anymore, and you didn't get trained to manage people. Do you know what I mean? That's not the skill that you got good at that made you valuable. So now you're having to do a totally different thing.
There is that, but there's also the thing, like, COVID scarred me, man. Like, for example, okay, so you do what you have to do for 10 years to make it a certain way, a certain distance up the pyramid. And if you stand your ground against nonsense, and luckily the Supreme Court of the United States ruled a certain way when the Biden administration was basically
At the 11th hour.
right. However, it easily could have gone the other way. The company I was working with at the time, they were literally, if you didn't respond to their questionnaire, they were going to assume that you were unvaccinated, And they told us, which was unwise on their part, they should have just waited for the ruling. But they told us that, that based off how the Supreme Court rules, we may or may not have to separate people based off their vax status. We may have to require certain people to wear masks, etc., which is
Show me your papers.
so highly unethical to where you're now having companies, the federal government, whatever, now people are designating the clean and the unclean. It's exactly where we were heading.
Yeah.
So you can invest.
Look at the damn concentration camp-esque places in Australia where they had the
God.
unvaccinated camps.
If you want to know what happens when the citizenry is not allowed to own arms, look at Australia.
Yeah.
They had no recourse. But so you can invest 10 years working up the company ladder, and then something like that comes along,
Black swan event.
backed by the federal government, and to stand your ground, to hold ethical grounds, you could throw your whole career away because society's gone unhinged.
And then you're back to zero unless you have some savings. And even then, you're not making income, so you're just fucked.
And I mean, it's like defined savings. I mean, gold is net zero, and then basically anything else,
Is
you either
losing
have to
money.
sell for a tax, or is losing money if it's a bond or if it's just dollars or fiat currency. So it's the incentive structure is all messed up. You're forcing people to fight an uphill battle. And I'm a capitalist, and I believe in, people thriving in spite of the obstacles in front of them. But there's also something to be said for incentives. If you destroy incentives, then you're essentially you're creating a lower and lower common denominator for everyone.
Yeah, what is it? Charlie Munger said, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome.
Yeah. And that's where we are. It's frustrating.
There's no incentives and there's no outcomes.
But Bitcoin changes the game. Bitcoin changes the game because it allows people to store their economic energy
In an unconfiscatable way.
Mm-hmm. It's unconfiscatable. And I know there's a lot of people who will say, oh, well, what about these people, the FBI confiscate? No. If you know what you're doing, it's an unconfiscatable asset. Anytime you hear that, a government somewhere seizes somebody's assets, chances are they stored their keys on like the cloud or something, and the government was able to use, again, a third party and confiscate it.
Or it was on an exchange or something like that.
Right. But it's unconfiscatable. It can't be debased. You can take it with you anywhere. You can't do that with gold. Try hopping on a plane with $1 million worth of gold. And $1 million isn't even a lot of money to some people. Right? So if you're, if you have made it and you have reached it, I mean, good luck getting your money out of the country. All the hoops you have to go through.
Yeah, you can store it in your head and with Bitcoin and just walk away, fly away.
You could have multi-signature wallets. You could have different keys in different countries. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a number of ways you can do it. But I was talking with a good friend of mine about this recently, and I fundamentally agree with him. I actually think the measure of freedom that a country has, the easiest way to measure it is how much free speech is allowed. And I still hold the United States of America probably has the greatest respect for free speech anywhere in the world. Now maybe there are some exceptions to that. I don't know of any, and I have looked. And there's one place in the world I wouldn't mind that I would personally live. But it's a combination of things. Freedom is held up by multiple things. Right to self-defense, right to free speech. But right to free speech is fundamental. That's why it's our first freedom. If you can't discuss things freely, if you can't be authentic and everybody's got a mask on and you're self-censoring, problems can't be addressed, then you lose your freedom. The entire society loses. And if you want to know the real reason, we'll say one of the real reasons why President Donald Trump is so hated by the establishment, it's because he said whatever he wanted. The reason he had the follower base early on is not because people are mind-numb robots who just believed everything he said. There are plenty of things to disagree with Trump on about. For example, I disagree with eminent domain and a bunch of other things that he firmly agrees with. But the dude says what he says what he thinks. That is rare.
And you can only do that if you're in the position where you have the freedom to do it, which is having money.
Elon Musk is another example.
Exactly.
These are horrible, evil billionaires, you know. But the reason that it's billionaires who are able to get away with this stuff is because they don't need anybody's money.
Yeah.
All these people in Congress, they're all beholden to somebody. They all sold some part of their soul to get funding, to have campaigns, and they know they have to stay within certain parameters.
Now they're beholden to these special interests and everything like that. They're, owned basically.
They can't rock the boat too much. But it's all going to change. We're very fortunate because Bitcoin's here to stay. It's more decentralized than ever. And on top of that, it's a bold statement, but I believe it's true. I do not believe that the left in America, who's controlled the narrative for a very long time, I don't believe that they control the narrative anymore.
It's definitely shifting. I mean, it's with the election, I think it was closer than people think, but than the right tends to believe. But I think it was an obvious mandate to, change things, and we've seen a bunch of stuff that's, I would have never thought we would see.
I was quite surprised at how well things turned out.
Yeah. And that's why you can see the power of the left slipping as Trump getting elected. The DNC and the federal judges are, defying his orders, but he's still carrying them out, executively anyway.
To the best
going
of his
around
ability.
him. Yeah. Which, could lead to problems, but it's definitely encouraging.
The left, one of the mistakes I see them have made over the years is that they, through their own form of self-censorship, but also trying to censor others, they missed the opportunity to kind of see where media was going and what it was evolving into. They controlled traditional media, newspapers, TV channels, with the exception of Fox News, which didn't even exist until the 90s. That's why the left has always hated it so much, is, it came out, and now the right has a voice on cable news, and it also became the largest cable news audience. Not that I'm here to defend Fox News, but is an example of where the right was able to go. Anything that challenges the left's power, they hate and they try to destroy. They don't want an actual dialogue. Like Rush Limbaugh used to say, the left couldn't do this. The left could not talk for 3 hours and keep an audience of 40 million people. They couldn't do it.
Yeah.
It's marketing, propaganda, shallow, surface level, emotional appeals,
Sound bites.
dividing people into various groups, pretending that you're helping these individual groups, and maybe on the surface you are in a very shallow sense, but long term you're not doing anything for these groups. And fundamentally, what this country is based off of and what made this country great is the fundamental belief in that the individual is the true minority, if you will.
In the sense that the left means that minorities have want minorities to have power.
Right. And essentially, if you believe in individual liberty and personal sovereignty, what comes along with that is things like personal responsibility. And it's a hard thing to sell when you create an umbrella party that wants a victim class. You are a victim for some reason. That is the opposite message of personal responsibility.
Yeah. And that's the trap of the left. It started, with these protected classes, and it's a thing where if you carry it to its logical conclusion, it's obviously insane, and that's why they can't hold the attention. Like, you look at Gavin Newsom's podcast. He's doing a 3-hour podcast now. Did you hear about that?
I did not.
Yeah, so that's interesting, but is anybody watching it? And he's having guests on that are right-leaning, left-leaning, all over the spectrum, and supposedly having respectful conversations with them. I haven't heard it, but I'm just saying there's an attempt for, and I think he's a sleazebag who's gonna try to be elected next time he's gonna try to run for president. But I mean, I don't know. But if you carry the left's, if you untether one of the premises that the left holds to be true, they start to unravel their whole world, their whole ontotheological framework, and they not that they have one to speak of, but if all the things that they hold to be true can be easily disassembled if they get more information, if one of these things is proven, if they can see it in their mind that it's false, they end up. That's why more people come from left to right than right to left. You're not going to see, and you have to be ultimately pure to go into the left. You have to have this purity of the party line, and it gets crazier and crazier every year. I mean, I used to be on the left, and I am certainly no longer. It didn't take very long after trans and just the just all the crazy things that have gone on to transition towards the right.
Mm-hmm. The left eats themselves.
Absolutely.
And you cannot have a thriving society without individual liberty, individual sovereignty, and therefore personal responsibility. But as Rush Limbaugh used to say, it's hard to compete with Santa Claus.
True.